Welcome to another episode of Relearning Work, where we dive into the future of learning and work. In each episode, we'll bring you conversations with leaders from industry and education to challenge assumptions, propose ideas, and share learnings as we all navigate this world that is being rapidly reshaped by agentic AI. Now, whether you're an educator, a student, or a business executive looking to stay ahead in this rapidly changing landscape, there's something here for you. I'm your host, David Yip. Now today, I'm joined by a very special guest, Patrick Kidd, or PK as we refer to be called. He's got a very interesting background, 30 years in the military, both in the UK and here in Australia, before retiring from the Australian Army 10 years ago as a Brigadier. He then entered the world of consulting, joining Deloitte, helping them deliver the Invictus Games in Sydney in 2018 as CEO. He was then appointed as the founding CEO of the federal government-funded Digital Skills Organisation to address Australia's digital skills shortage, which leads us to now, where he is the CEO of Future Skills Organisation, one of the government's jobs and skills councils focused on vocational education to fast-track innovative training solutions to support the finance, technology and business sectors. PK's achievements and service to the community has been recognised by a Queen's Commendation, then an OBE in the UK and an OAM in Australia. Wow, talk about an impactful career. So honoured to have you on the show, PK, and especially as one of our early guests.
Thank you, David. Very, very kind introduction. I wouldn't say it's as great as you made it. I don't think, I'm just very lucky to have done the type of work that I've done. Very proud to have been a soldier for so long, proud to have done the work that I did with the Invictus Games, proud to have been sort of recognised, but, always when you do this type of work, you're doing it with normally an amazing team of people who work unbelievably hard for sort of things that sort of make sense and have a broader purpose. And it's always an absolute privilege to be doing work which is about trying to improve the world in which we live, which is what you do as well. So it's I'm really, I look back on my career and think I'm pretty much blessed, to be honest.
Yeah, can you share a bit more about how you got here? So, coming from the military into civilian life into consulting and tech, and now tasked with arguably one of the biggest jobs in addressing this massive skill shortage. We're talking about not just a company or even a sector. This is societal. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of jobs. How did you end up here?
Of course, you can never really know, do you? Really, sort of like you start off in one place and end up in another. And I think actually, funny enough, it gets to your last point. I think the world we live in now. Jobs don't exist in the way that jobs used to exist. Sort of, these very rigid sort of career structures where you start in a company and you work your way up through that company and get to the top or towards the top as you spend more time there. That doesn't really exist now. People go into jobs, they change jobs, they move horizontally, they move vertically. They're doing very different things from where they come from. And I suppose it takes you to a place whereby people increasingly in the world that we live in today need to have a skill set that enables them to be flexible. And so back to your question to me, the only decision I've ever made in my life was to be a soldier. I became a soldier and, went through that process and that system. That system has got a very structured approach to how they train you and prepare you for the environments that you are focused on. If I think of my 30 years of service in the military, I probably spent 7 years being educated, full time. That's an amazing thing, isn't it? Sort of like how many people would have had that luxury, through the workplace enabled training, 7 years in the military, and you come out of it, at the end of, let's say, 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, you've done some unusual things, you've worked with people, but all the time the commonality of the work is around complex, uncertain environments, things that should never be what they should be, the need to be able to unpack problems and work out what you're going to do about it, and then to communicate that to people so that you can get people doing things. And so often it's about enabling people, giving people simplicity so that they can actually start to do something which helps to address the challenges that they're facing. And so when I think about, my transition from the military into life after that, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I probably didn't want to do anything, quite frankly. But I had a very strong skill base on which to draw as I then went out into the workplace. I was very lucky to be offered a job by Deloitte, and they had no idea what they were bringing into their organisation at that point in time. So that was like interesting for them, I'm sure, and interesting for me. But the same skills that you had learned in the military, you're then applying in a consultancy sort of environment. I was a terrible consultant, I think, probably. But again, I was blessed in as much as the fact they connected me up to the Invictus Games as an opportunity, which I then was able to do something with that, and then ended up as the CEO of that organisation. It's interesting as you think about sliding door moments. The Invictus Games for me was an absolute, like, a brilliant opportunity. To work with a community of people that I love, the people that I know so well, from the background that I come from, international as well as Australian. But it also taught me about being a CEO. And that's it's a new skill set, isn't it, in terms of running an organisation, building an organisation, governing an organisation. It has its own sort of challenges and sort of nuances that go with it. And so that taught me how to do that. And then all of a sudden now you're then thinking about jobs as a CEO, not necessarily as a consultant or a soldier. And so my evolution really was driven by the skills that I learnt in the military, the opportunities that I was then given to work, then using those opportunities to then find my way somewhere else. The CEO of Invictus took me back into Deloitte for a year after that, where I sort of set up their fledgling sort of sports practice. That then took me to then running an IT digital transformation project into the government, which then took me into the digital skills organisation, which then transitioned into the future skills organisation. So really I'm completely accidental. Nothing is organised. I haven't really thought my way through any of it. But the skills that I learnt when I was in the military are the skills that I draw on today, and the skills really that I've been able to use to help me move from one job to another as I go forwards. And I absolutely believe in this idea of the fact that if you've got people with the right base skills, the confidence to be able to demonstrate them and use them, then there's nothing they can't do. You've always got to acquire additional knowledge. You've got to be curious, but you can do some amazing things.
Yeah. That's amazing, and that's, I think, a really, really good example to be, especially one of our early guests as well, because this podcast is called Relearning Work, and it's called Relearning Work because I think we're entering into this really exciting but also unusual phase in, I guess, the world's evolution, where a lot of things that we have done and are doing right now would change quite dramatically, and it's quite uncomfortable for a lot of people. And some people, most people actually evolve, and they'll do jobs which are similar and maybe adjacent, but very few people do completely different things, right? And what you've just described is just big jumps, completely different, right? From the military to consulting and then to transformation. And yes, there's a common thread to all of that though, but then it still requires these big jumps and to relearn the work that you're doing and the value of the work that you're doing. I think that's such a it's really great to have you to really share how you've done that. And you've mentioned a lot about skills, but I think there's maybe something before skills around your mindset, because skills is one thing and that's really important to pick up things, but I think even before that you need to be in the right frame of mind, right, to be able to identify or be able to see the skills that you need or see the opportunities. Can you talk a bit about that and I guess the enabling mindset? I mean, maybe some of the assumptions around the mindset that it puts you in.
It's a great pickup actually, David. I think the mindset is important, isn't it? It's sort of, you've got to have a bias for learning. You've got to have a bias to be curious. You've got to be interested in what's going on around you. You've got to be able to sense the environment, to pull together ideas and themes that you can then treat through whichever sort of skill sets or knowledge or capabilities that you have. And I think, sometimes it feels to me that when you're engaging, when you're working with people, you get three different types of people. You get sort of people who are in the detail and love the detail, and that's great because every organisation needs those guys and girls. You get people who are like super strategic and all they want to do is think about policy and sort of like how to change the world. And then you get, I think, people in the middle who are able to connect the two things together, and which is where I probably see myself. You need all three types But if you don't understand why you're doing something, then it's very hard to do the right thing. And so I think to your point about mindset, I think that in this day and age in particular, you've got, the world is changing quickly. The technologies that we're using are changing quickly. Funnily enough, I think the fundamental skills and capabilities that we all need to have are the same. So you talked about, my shifts across, military into consulting, into running an event, into doing an IT transformation project, into skills, education, training and development. They appear to be completely different, but actually they're remarkably the same. And so, the skills that I need in the roles that I'm playing are the same skills. It's about bringing people together. It's about focusing upon the problem that you most want to fix. It's then about aligning effort, communicating, sort of really, I think, prioritizing the things that you really need to get that enable you to get things done, and working with others, stakeholders, to ensure that what you're doing is the right thing at a moment in time. So, funny enough, I think it's all the same, as far as that's concerned. It's just the context that then is a little bit different. But I do think, the challenge that we have now in our economy is that, we're moving, the economy is changing. It used to be an industrial economy, which is focused on manufacturing, production, hardcore things that are still a very important part of the Australian economy, that need to be treated in a certain way and have certain types of jobs that sit within that. But now we're moving towards one which is more of a service-based, knowledge-based economy. And so you've got to have people who can now be comfortable in that world, who can draw down on knowledge and then apply it in the work that they do. And I think that's quite different to where we were before. We have an education and training system which is still fundamentally trying to prepare somebody to do a job. And actually that job doesn't exist, or that job is changing. And it's like, and maybe people don't want to do that job. So you want to sort of like now, I think, shift ourselves. We have to shift ourselves to something which is much more flexible, which enables people to realise their potential, which recognises that there's lots of little bits of learning that people need to have over time. And we need to make that easy for people to do so that they can acquire the skills needed to then use them in the workplace.
Yeah, well, there's definitely a lot to unpack there, what you just said. But a couple of things I do want to just maybe drill down into. It sounds to me that there is, that, at least in your career path, you do have an underlying assumption there. I don't know whether you're aware of it or not, but it sounds, you assume that it can be done. If you tackle it, it can be done, and there's nothing to be afraid of, or there may be something to be afraid of, but you can still do it, right? Not everyone has that. Some people assume, okay, maybe if I just avoid it, things this will pass. Or some people assume, oh, I'm not up to it, or someone else is better, I think assumptions is something that goes hand in glove with mindset, because we need to know what the underlying assumptions are and be conscious and aware of it, and then be able to adjust some of those or validate whether that's a right assumption or not, in order to shift our mindset and then see the opportunities.
You can't be a soldier and believe that you're not going to get the job done. Like, it's completely counterintuitive, isn't it? Sort of like you'd be very depressed very quickly. So you're right. I mean, I'm a nightmare in the workplace, because I think it's like, well, of course you can get it done. How hard can it be? Is a phrase that I regrettably use far too often. And I do believe that you've got to have a bias for action. You've got to keep pushing forwards. If you're going forwards, then you're always going to get a result. If you do nothing, guess what? You'll achieve nothing. So I think it becomes a very important part of driving change. And funnily enough, actually, to pick up that particular theme you've identified there, it very much drives how you then run an organisation. So our organisation is run on the idea of sprints, and you control what you can control in terms of time, but we're ambitious about where we want to get to at the end of a sprint. Not for us, it's 90 days, but let's be clear about where we're trying to get to and get there. And routinely, even though you think you can't do it, you sort of get to probably 80 to 90% of what you set out to do. And so therefore you sort of like, you can move, and you can move quite quickly. And so I think your point is a very solid one, which is, you've got to believe, you've got to be a believer, haven't you? You've got to sort of believe that your energy that you put in is going to get a response that comes out of it. And when you have a team of people who are similar, in that mindset, that's an amazing thing. That's not to say you want everybody to be the same. Sort of people like me are a nightmare because I'm big picture, sort of trying to drive towards a broad objective. You then need people who can work the detail to sort of like really deliver it, and that's a different thing. But you've got to have that combination of people within your team to help you get to where you need to get to.
Yeah. Now, so just diving more deeply into, you mentioned a lot of skills before that you've developed and you've picked up, and you see that other people need to develop as well. And certainly from a future skills organization, that's one of the key focus areas. AI, and particularly agentic AI, that's going to be a massive game changer. Of all the skills people can have, and there are hundreds of them, right? And it can seem quite overwhelming for people. What do I pick up, and what if I learn it, and it becomes redundant after I've learned it. So how would you sort of describe the important skills versus, I mean, just to prioritize and help people to focus on the right things and things that matter, the skills that matter.
I think like the AI conversation is a classic, isn't it? It's sort of like it's the term of the moment, and that's good. If that's what it takes to get people moving, to realise that there is a considerable opportunity out there for them to take advantage of that will benefit them individually as well as their organisations, then that would be a great thing. When I reflect on generative AI in particular, I worry a little bit about the language and what we mean by it. So for me, generative AI is effectively digital skills. Digital skills are cyber skills are AI skills are digital skills. And so it's all the same stuff, but we've got to find a way of making sure that our population at all levels, be it in the workplace, in schools and education, in community, the most disadvantaged. This type of technology now is absolutely omnipresent in work, learning, and life. So it's everything that we do, and it's like there's no point trying to pretend it's. That's right. It's the reality. So it's like, shame on us. We've absolutely got to start to prepare people for that, and we've got to put a sort of a skills framework around that, so that we are making those skills available to the broadest range of people across our communities. And to be frank, at the moment, we don't do that. We don't have a consistent language that describes these skills. So therefore, we don't set, because we don't have any standards that go with the language, we don't set a clear North Star that gives people something to aim towards. Every different business, be they small, medium or large, will have a different perspective as to what skills they need. So once again, the messaging and the signals that we're sending to the skill system are confusing. And fundamentally, if we're looking to do any of these things, we need to be thinking about how to do this stuff at scale. We've got so many barriers in place across the system, be they government barriers, organisational barriers, industry barriers, that prevent us from sort of like coming together about the things that are most important. And so I think the other part that goes with this is how do we put in place training, skills training, which is accessible to the broadest range of people, that can be delivered quickly, that meets their needs, and actually is going to be recognised and valued in the workplace. And to me, what we're talking about here, be it AI skills, digital skills, cyber skills, they're as important as reading and writing. They sit at the same level. And so it needs some proper energy to sort of come in behind it to really give it a push. And that's a major focus for us as a future skills organisation in 2025. But we all need to be ideally saying the same thing. We should all be aligned on the fact that these skills are important. Like there's a million skills out there, they're all important. But like there are some skills which are so fundamental that we have to put them in place. And so I think the digital AI cyber skills are an example of changing skill sets that we have to enable people to flourish in the world that we live in. But there's more to it. Everything that we hear from employers, and we were out last night, David, talking to your mate. The sort of like the number one thing that employers want to see is actually people's ability to communicate, to work within teams, to be able to understand and work out complex problems, to think at an entrepreneurial level about the business of doing business. The way in which we interact with our world now is completely different. It hasn't got there yet. It will shift and change and continue to evolve at pace, but it is changing very, very quickly. And so we should be thinking about how we can empower people to effectively access the knowledge economy that exists so they can draw down on the information and use the information to help them do their jobs better. And that's an amazing opportunity. We talk about productivity in Australia as being a key driver, given our current situation in the world. Like, I genuinely believe that if we can put our hands around generative AI and connect it to people in the workplace, that will be the quickest way of uplifting productivity of companies and uplifting the productivity of people within the workplace. I can see no other technology that gets remotely close to it.
Yeah, it is absolutely, I guess, a game changer in terms of productivity. I know I use AI daily, many AI tools, and one I use all the time is a note-taking app, and it's a huge productivity benefit for me because it means that I can, one, focus on my meetings instead of jotting down notes and trying to multitask. But it's just one of these things that's become indispensable. So absolutely huge productivity boost for everyone. Now you mentioned some skills, and it sounds like there are a bunch of, I call them core skills that are fundamental that everyone needs to have. So communications, you mentioned one of them. Working with each other. These are so fundamental to every single job. They're generalists, yet super important. And then there are some specialist ones that are specific to industries or particular kind of job functions. Is that a good way to think about it? Generalist,
Yeah,
specialist, core skills,
I think it is.
hard skills.
I think the language is problematic because everybody's got a definition of what you mean by the terms, but I think that distinction between specialist skills for a job or an industry versus generalist skills that sit across multiple jobs, across multiple industries is a way of just helping us to sort of demarcate them and understand the difference. I think what you find as we move from what was an industrial economy where the specialist skills were the most important skills, the things that gave people a license to work safely in a factory, on a building site, cut people's hair. I think we're moving now to a place whereby there's a much stronger recognition of the need for people who can work across those areas with those generalist skills. The generalist skills are the things that enable people to move from job to job, to grow within the role. But what we haven't done, we've probably overinvested in sort of like the development of the specialist skills, and we haven't really thought about how to develop the generalist skills. And so they probably look pretty much the same as they've always looked. So we need to package them differently. We need to review them and make sure they are fit for purpose. And then we need to really promote them and push them so that people know that they exist and that they are accessible skills. And I genuinely think that as the technology changes and as we access technology in different ways, it's those generalist skills that will enable people to be increasingly successful as we go forward. So the greatest potential comes from that, rather than necessarily keeping on, refining to the nth degree a specialist skill set for being a bookkeeper, for example.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. The education system is very focused on the specialist side of things, and yes, general skills are a part of the system, but it feels to me like almost those generalist skills you kind of pick up in an ad hoc. You kind of just you know learn it on the fly. They're not intentional. The special knowledge is what's being taught by, but communicating, collaborating with others is something you just have to pick up along the way. And now I think it's probably the other way around. We need to be very intentional about those communications, collaboration skills, and really focus in on those as the important parts. And the specialist ones are become the ones you pick up along the way.
I think that's a great way of talking about it. I think intention is a good word for this, and there is a linkage there between that and the work that the government's trying to do now, which is connected to a program called Qualifications Reform, which is trying to look at the purpose behind a qualification. So if you can be clear about why you have a qualification, then you can design it in the right way. So some qualifications are there to give people a very unique skill set to operate in a very unique environment. That's okay. But there are increasingly a larger number of other qualifications whose purpose is to do exactly what you just talked about. So let's be clear about it, because you then deliver those qualifications in a different way. We recognise that actually those qualifications should not be things that take you like 3 years, 2 years, 1 year. They should be like micro credentials that you can deliver in like 2 to 3 weeks. And you can stack them in different ways to take you to some tangible demonstration of knowledge in an environment, whatever that means. But we've got to be clear about why we're doing things and make sure it's relevant to its context.
Yeah. Now, I guess going into more specific examples. So you mentioned about skills and journalists and specialists and some reform activity going on. Can you point to some, I don't know, an institution, maybe a TAFE, university, or even a workplace that's doing innovative things well and really leading the pack in showing how, we should be focusing on and how we should be developing people? Some examples that we can
Yeah, I
review.
think I was pondering this when you sort of suggested you're going to ask that question. It's sort of like there are a million examples of great practice. Like lots of people do, lots of organisations are doing different things. They're all the same, but they're all different, and they sort of like focus on different areas. They'll focus on First Nations people, on so gender, disability, neurodiverse. So there's some great examples of programs whereby companies have got together with training providers to create a pathway for people in a particular area. The the sort of the reality, I think, is almost that there are so many of these programs, it's quite hard to actually sort of codify one that works better than another. They're sort of like they're relevant to their context. But I think there are some characteristics that come together, when you're doing this type of thing. So the idea of the employer being fundamentally integrated, the industry being fundamentally integrated into the development, the design and the development of, and the delivery of the training is super important. So this isn't about putting people into environments whereby they are learning in a conventional way. You're putting them into environments whereby they're dealing with real world problems and they are coming up with solutions that reflect those real world problems. And
Earning
to
and
do
learning
that,
at the same time.
yeah,
Not,
100%, yeah,
yeah,
work integrated learning. And
yeah.
to do that, you've got to have industry wanting to be involved. So good programs are where you see that sort of thing happening. Good programs are ones whereby there is an endpoint to the program. So, you finish the qualification and actually there is a job at the end of the day for that individual. So you're encouraging the person to follow their way through the qualification and the program so that they can see an outcome that comes at the end of it. Other examples of good programs, I think, is the idea of lifelong learning. And so, we need to stop thinking about qualifications as being these sort of like 3 year moments in time. You finish with a qualification and that's it, great, crack on and go and live
Yeah.
the rest of your life. Actually, it's
It's the sequential
the
thing. Yeah.
yeah, you've got to get people to come back and keep on learning, because that's the environment that we're in. And I think, one of those characteristics we talked about in the last conversation that's key in terms of what are people looking for is curiosity, that sort of mindset point to where you were at the very start of this, which is around making sure people have got a growth mindset, a curiosity mindset, and then creating the opportunities for them to engage with that. Good programs are where employers enable people to learn. So they recognise they have an obligation to work with their staff to help them upskill, which means you have to give them time to be able to do that, and you have to ask for it through your programs. So I think the challenge that we have, I think, is that there are lots and lots of examples, but what we don't have is an institutional response to it. So when you go to our education training system, it's very fragmented, and so nothing is really happening at the scale that's necessary. And so I think there's real challenges around how do we understand the role that industry needs to play with the education training sector. Where does education training start and finish? Where does industry start and finish? And again, to our conversation we had last night, industry always wants people who are job ready. Education training, the system of education training, its job is not to do that. Its job is to give people a base set of skills that can then be applied in a workplace context. So I think there has to be a much more grown-up conversation about the level to which industry leans in to help the education training system sort of move up and out. But to your question, great examples of programs I've been impressed by. So here are a few. The Digital Jobs Program in Victoria, where they've trained thousands of Victorians with digital skills by putting them through short, less than 3 month long micro credentials, which meet a skills need that's been identified in the economy.
And that's
Great
for
program.
mature age workers, right?
Yeah, mature age workers.
Yeah.
But they've done it at scale. They've connected people up to training. They've assessed them at the start to make sure they are the right types of people. The challenge that they've always had is working with employers to make sure there's a job there at the end of it to ensure that the process can be completed. But that's a good example of
A good starting point.
a program, that's right, that the state government has run. Another good example is Accenture, who do a program with neurodiverse people through Generation Australia. So they work with a particular type of people who've got certain characteristics, and they work with Gen Australia to ensure that they've got a course that is designed to help them to be successful and then to employ them at the end of that. So that's a good example of industry and training providers working together. There's a thing called the Australian Skills Guarantee, which the government has just launched, which will be interesting. And in there, it's around incentivising people, organisations at a certain level and size in construction and technology to ensure that when they bid for government work, they've got a program in place which enables people to be brought through a non-traditional pathway. So you're creating workplace learning opportunities for people through the government and the levers that it can hold. Another example of great work is the New South Wales Digital Skills Compact, whereby they have a thing called a pledge. And in there, all the employers that sign up for that pledge commit to employing people from different pathways. And so in this game, I think there's something about how you develop your education training, but the real secret of success is how you bring industry into the delivery of that education training and how you recognise it as a value chain. At the end of the value chain is somebody in a job and staying in a job. It's not completing a course at a local TAFE or a local university and then going off to do something else.
Yeah.
So
It's all interconnected.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's a value chain. Like we're trying to address the skills gap here, and we need to work together to do that. And no one part of the system can do it on their own. You have to work together.
Yeah. Excellent. So now, just winding up here, I'd always like to ask a question, which, this is ultimately a podcast about learning, about work, and education is the overall umbrella. So my final question to you is, who's the teacher, or it could be a mentor or a coach or a manager, who's one of your most impactful teachers that's really made a difference in your life, and why?
So I like this question a lot, David, and then I found it really hard to answer. So I'd love to know what all your other people sort of respond to this, because it's sort of like it's, at the end of sort of like 35 years in the workplace, you draw on so many different things to inform how you think about the world. And so I actually think it's impossible for me to say that, but I will, but I'll tell you three things, for what it's worth. I'm going to go back to a gentleman called Tom Horn when I was just commissioned from the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst and about to go and join the regiment that I was appointed to go to as a lieutenant. And I asked him for some advice about how he felt that I should deal with soldiers, the first time you're going to command soldiers in that environment. And he looked at me and he sort of then looked up at the sky and he said, PK, he said, 3 words of advice. He said, in all your dealings with your soldiers, be firm, be fair, and be friendly. And that was great advice. And that is advice that when I think about people, that is the advice that I've used for 35 years and always go back to it. So Tom Horn gets a flick. I'm going to go to Winston Churchill. Not because Winston Churchill was Winston Churchill, but because actually there is a man who lived for, I think, 89 to 92 years, forget exactly what it was, but of those years that he lived, he spent 63 years of service in support of his country, either as a soldier or as a politician or as a prime minister. And he wrote more words about the world than Charles Dickens and William Shakespeare combined. And I think, my God, what a contribution that individual made to our world. Like him or hate him, it doesn't matter. The point is, there was a man dedicated to service. So that was that's an important thing I always reflect on. And then I think the other third component is, generally, it's the people that I work with. Work with in the past, work with today, will work with in the future. I learn off each and every one of them all of the time. And, I learned off you, David, sort of a year and a half ago when we first met. So you all inspire me, quite frankly. And it's the ability to sort of listen to what people do and understand how you can then work with that to sort of help yourself get better. I think that's back to mindset and being curious. But I think that for me is a really important part of how I make sense of my world.
Fantastic, thank you, PK. And so in wrap up, I always have one last segment that is a fun one. It's about plugs, and we all like to plug things. And so, PK, who or which organization or thing or person, just anything that you want to plug in this show?
Well, I'm gonna plug. Again, I thought about this, and I thank you for the warning. I'm going to plug 2025 and Jobs and Skills Councils. Jobs and Skills Councils are there to connect industry to the education training system. We've been a couple of years in the setup. 2025 is the year of action. This is where we begin to shift and change the education training system towards whatever it's going to be into the future, but we can't keep on doing things the way that we've always done them. It's time for change. I'm super proud to be a part of a community of people who are trying to do the same thing. And so in there, I'm tremendously optimistic about what we can do to help shift our system into a place whereby it's world leading as opposed to world following.
Fantastic. Thank you, PK. And on my side, I will shamelessly plug this show. So to all the audience, don't forget to like and subscribe. Go to your favorite podcast app and give us 5 stars or whatever the good thing is. And if you want to reach out and you have questions you would like us to answer, please send them to david.yip@alumly.co. That's ALUMLY.co. I'd love to hear from you. And that's another episode of Relearning Work, and we will see you next time.